Christopher Martin didn't want to go to work that day. But it wasn't just that the weather was terrible, it was also his mood. Frankly, Christopher was tired of endless negotiations and meetings and board meetings, none of which could be avoided in order to get business done. The man who had succeeded his late father as head of the company had been running it for 15 years and was so good at it that his competitors couldn't help but be jealous. But they probably didn't realize that there are two sides to every coin, and that achieving so much in business certainly requires some sacrifice. The fact was that at 45, Christopher still hadn't started a family, and it didn't look like he was going to. Of course, he had had various affairs, but they never led to serious relationships. And now the man was at the age where he considered starting something new a thankless, if not pointless, endeavor. At the same time, Christopher always remembered that there had once been a great love in his life. It happened 20 years ago when he was young and full of vigor. Life seemed easy and predictable. Especially with his father making all the important business decisions. He met Maggie at a college Thanksgiving party. The young people hit it off and spent most of the evening together. Maggie Simmons was an orphan, her parents died in a car accident. But Christopher did not care, he never judged people by their wealth. Rather by their personal qualities. Unfortunately, Christopher's parents didn't share his views either, and so they had been trying to get their son to break up with Maggie ever since they met her. "Son, why do you need this orphan? Trust me, you're not a good investment in your life," said Christopher's mother. By this time, the couple had moved into a rented house outside of town near a river and forest. Christopher remembered those days with fondness and nostalgia. To prove that his intentions were serious, the young man gave Maggie a beautiful silver bracelet in the shape of a twisted snake that enveloped the wearer's wrist. The snake's eyes were made of small diamonds and its split tongue was made of amber. Maggie's eyes lit up with happiness, and Christopher realized he had chosen the perfect gift. Even 20 years later, the businessman remembered that beautiful day in great detail. The young people dreamed of marriage, children, and a happy life together. But as is often the case, their dreams were not destined to come true. It all began when Christopher came home early from work one day and found the house empty. Deciding that Maggie had gone swimming, the man quickly walked toward the river. But when he saw Maggie's clothes neatly folded by the water's edge, he became concerned. The woman was nowhere to be found, which alarmed Christopher, who tried hard not to think that his fiancée might have drowned. There are no words to describe the fear he felt. Divers and search parties scoured the river bottom for days but never found Maggie's body. "The current is very strong and could have carried the body far out of state," said one of the rescuers. Despite the opinions of experts, Christopher stubbornly refused to believe that his beloved had really drowned. Time passed. After pulling himself together, he decided to go to work and prepare for another unremarkable day. To make matters worse, Christopher had important negotiations to attend in a week's time. In a week, Christopher would have important guests from a neighboring country. The thing is, his partners were family men who liked it when their colleagues brought their spouses and children to such meetings. Much to Christopher's chagrin, he had neither. "I'll just have to go to the meeting alone and hope for the best," Christopher thought. The businessman's home was a considerable distance from the city. The drive to the office took about half an hour. After a few miles, the businessman saw a woman standing by the side of the road with containers of milk beside her. At first, Christopher wanted to drive by, but when he saw the sadness in the woman's eyes, he stopped abruptly. He suddenly felt sorry for the stranger who had to stand by the side of the road in such bad weather. "Good morning, madam, I would like to buy all the milk you are selling," said Christopher with a smile. Hope flashed in the young woman's eyes. "Thank you, sir, you are my best customer. I hadn't even hoped to sell all the goods so quickly." She mumbled, embarrassed. "I'm happy to help you," Christopher replied. He couldn't understand why he had decided to stop and buy all the milk. Glancing at the stranger, the businessman introduced himself and then learned that the girl's name was April. And then an interesting thought popped into Christopher's head. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes, of course. Would you come with me to an event?" Hearing the man's question, the young woman was surprised and blushed deeply. Apparently, April thought that Christopher was asking her out on a date. At this point, the businessman realized he had made a mistake and rushed to rectify the situation. "Oh no, sorry, that's not what I meant. It's not about asking her out. The thing is, I have an important business meeting coming up and all the partners will be there with their families. So I wanted to invite you as my daughter. No one will know who you really are. The fate of my company depends on this meeting," the man blurted out quickly. After listening to the businessman, April thought for a moment. Of course, she would be grateful to him for saving her from having to stand on the street for a few more hours, but agreeing to pretend to be someone's daughter was a strange idea. "Don't worry, I'm a decent man and I realize that my offer may seem strange to you. Here is my identification card. If you want, you can find information about me on social media. I am indeed a businessman and my name is Christopher Martin." The woman was still hesitant. "I'll also pay you handsomely for your time, so you won't have to sell milk on the street anymore," Christopher added hastily. In the back of his mind, he sensed that April was not happy about having to sell milk on the street. The man knew there had to be a reason that made her a vendor. At the mention of a good reward, April smiled and said, "A generous reward sounds good, but I don't have much free time. I'm a milkmaid on the farm. I only sell milk when I have free time." Christopher raised an eyebrow in surprise, but refrained from commenting, realizing that April was hiding something from him. "My mom is sick, she has a tumor that needs to be treated and the surgery is very expensive. Well, I am trying to make as much money as I can here, so if you want to hire me, I would be happy to do so, just let me know in advance so I can get my mom the medicine she needs." Christopher smiled and nodded. "That sounds good, leave me your phone number and I'll call you and don't worry about the outfit. I'll buy you everything you need," the businessman added. He stacked the milk containers in the trunk of the car. April just stood there and couldn't believe her luck. This kind and charming man had made her an offer she couldn't refuse. April's mother had been ill for 2 years. But there was no improvement in her condition. She underwent chemotherapy after chemotherapy, but they didn't have the desired effect and seemed to only worsen the already difficult situation the family was in. When she heard about Christopher's offer, she realized that this was her chance to earn some money to get the surgery she needed. After saying goodbye to Christopher, the young milkmaid began to wait for the call. She was excited and imagined herself as Cinderella, destined by fate to go to a beautiful ball. But instead of a pumpkin carriage, she would have an expensive car, and her companion would be her imaginary father. Sounds interesting, pretending to be someone's daughter. I get that every day, April thought with a smile. Meanwhile, the girl had decided not to tell her mother about her upcoming adventure. Penelope Patrick was a woman of old-fashioned values, and there was no way she would allow her daughter to accept such an offer. Meanwhile, the businessman skillfully drove his car down the street, thinking about his unexpected encounter. For some inexplicable reason, April's face seemed vaguely familiar to Christopher, but he couldn't figure out where he might have seen her before. The businessman was in a great mood because he felt he had found the perfect solution to his problem of not having a family. Now he could come to the meeting as a single father raising a daughter. It was an outright lie, of course, but Christopher saw nothing wrong with embellishing his biography in the eyes of the powerful partners. The generous businessman told the young woman to buy whatever she wanted. April was very excited because she had never had an outfit like this in her life. "I look so beautiful," April said as she looked at her reflection in the mirror. But when Christopher saw her in her evening gown, he was stunned. "My daughter is beautiful, I'm sure she'll dazzle everyone," thought the businessman proudly. With the meeting scheduled for the next evening, Christopher went over the details with April. The meeting would be in a restaurant. Meeting April at the entrance of the restaurant. Christopher took his daughter by the hand and led her into the restaurant. His business associates were waiting inside and were pleased to see that their partner appeared to be a family man. Pretending to be the businessman's daughter, she acted so naturally that it seemed she was really related to this powerful man. She raised her hand to fix her hair that had fallen over her eyes. At that moment, the sleeve of her dress fell down, revealing her wrist with a beautiful bracelet on it. Looking at it, Christopher was speechless. At first he thought he was delirious or that it was some kind of illusion. But no matter what Christopher tried to convince himself, the vision would not go away. What surprised the businessman was that April was wearing the same bracelet he had bought for his fiancée 20 years ago. 1,000 thoughts swirled in his head, his mind unable to come up with many theories, each more ridiculous than the last. The bracelet he'd given his fiancée was custom-made. Custom-made so that no one else could have it, and Christopher spent the rest of the evening reminiscing about the past. Barely listening to his companions, the man tried to figure out where April could have gotten the bracelet. It was not until the meeting was over that he was able to ask the question that had been on his mind all evening. "Excuse me for asking such a personal question, but I have to ask, where did you get that bracelet?" Christopher asked, hesitating with each word. "Bracelet? My mom gave it to me," April answered, for whom it was no big deal. Christopher turned white. "But that's impossible," he whispered, almost losing his balance and having to lean back against the wall. "Are you sick?" April asked worriedly. "No thanks, I'm fine. I'm fine. Just give me a minute to recover." Christopher rushed to reassure the girl. But in truth, he was far from fine. All his life he believed that Maggie was dead. The girl couldn't yet understand what all the excitement was about. Arrived in about 15 minutes. Stopping in front of April's house, he got out of the car and walked confidently to the door. And when Christopher stepped inside, he saw there was no Maggie, but a completely different woman, whose name was Penelope Patrick. Christopher had quite a difficult time explaining to the sick woman the purpose of his visit and getting her to understand what he was asking. All this time April stood by and couldn't believe what she was hearing. It appeared that the man standing in front of her could have been her real father and not just a pretend one. When Christopher finished his story, Penelope shook her head. As it turned out, she did know Maggie Simmons. The rich man's fiancée hadn't actually drowned in the river, but had been forced out of town by Christopher's parents, who had made her life a living hell. "So what happened then?" Christopher whispered. "What happened? She moved to another town and found out she was pregnant. That's when I met her. We lived in the neighborhood. Maggie was a good friend of mine, and then everything went wrong. It was a difficult labor. Maggie was bleeding internally. God himself couldn't have saved her that day. Before she died, she left April her bracelet as a gift from her fiancé, and asked me to take care of her daughter," said Penelope, sobbing. Then Christopher realized what had really happened. A week later Penelope had surgery, and it was a success. Moreover, Christopher paid for the woman's rehabilitation course at one of the best resorts in Miami. All this time April was close to her mother, as she still considered Penelope her closest person. Christopher was over the moon that he had found his daughter without even realizing he had her. A year passed. Surprisingly, Christopher and Penelope decided to start a family and live together. April finally met her loving and caring father. In conclusion of this amazing story, I would like to say that people who know the true meaning of the words, faith, hope and love are doomed to happiness, and sooner or later life will pleasantly surprise them.